Andre Taylor, the founder and executive director of Not This Time, a police reform and racial justice organization. Hi, Mayor Durkan. Thanks so much for joining us. You're a little busy these days. Proper social distancing, I want to point out. And actually, social distancing is one of the reasons that you're not sitting here along with Andre Taylor, because we can't make it work in this studio. Mayor, the last few days have been very, very difficult for our city. So what do we need to do now to begin healing?
So I think, Joni, there's a couple of things, and I think we all have to acknowledge that the rage and grief that we see, not just in Seattle, but across this country, is so real. And while it happened because Mr. Floyd's murder, it really, that was the tipping point. And I think it just resonated through generations of collective experience and trauma for the Black community. And so the first thing I think we have to do to start healing is we have to acknowledge that reality. And I think that in so many ways, we as a society have denied the existence of systemic racism. We think we're better than that. We do good things. We're this and that. But at its core, if we don't acknowledge that deep, deep, deep truth about our country and the systems, we can't begin to heal. Because I think that denial itself really is the lifeblood for the continued perpetuation of the inequities.
So some of what happened in recent days actually brought you almost to tears. I've known you for a long time. You're a rough, tough former U.S. attorney, mayor of this big city. I mean, what was it that almost made you cry like that?
You know, I've cried so many times in the last 4 days. I'll probably start crying now. And I think it is the combination of so many people have worked so long thinking that we've built a better world, but yet there is still so much pain and suffering and injustice that is even more palpable, and that we have lost our way in the ability to make sure that people can have hope and belief that we can get to a better place, because we have not empowered the people that truly have suffered the disenfranchisement for so long. And I think to see that Seattle, which is such a leader in so many ways, to be at the epicenter of these kinds of protests and see how it racks our city, both emotionally and spiritually, and then physically we see it, it has changed our world. And I think that we all have to take this moment in time, and we can, I think, come out of this better and stronger as a city and a nation, but it is going to take some long, long, deep, and honest work.
So in that regard, you, as I was coming in here today, you were getting ready to meet with some of the key protesters, and I believe that meeting took place. What were some of the, and I know it's going to be a long process, everyone understands that, but are there a few sort of early takeaways from that you can share with us, please?
Yeah, I think it was really interesting because the people, Andre Taylor, who you're going to talk to, is one of the people in the room, and there's such a range of people who speak for community and have different views. And for them, their concerns are what they need to see immediately. So for example, for some, it is how do we reach young Black men who have been involved in the criminal justice system and society has just abandoned and left to the side of the road? How do we rebuild trust and hope and opportunity? Others have very specific concerns they want to address about policing itself. Others want to make sure that we're really talking how the systems reflect. And how does, one of the questions we got was, why is the Community Police Commission not have any one of us on it? Why weren't we asked? And so we have to review all of our systems that are in place, and so that people know what's there that they can trust.
But from the early gatherings, are there the initial steps of a plan forward?
I think first there are some concrete steps I think that we'll take as a city, but I think what I heard really loudly in the room was, we're not coming to you to ask permission, or are we coming to you for you to tell us the plan? We want to be the people who are giving the voice to the plan, and we want you to help us make sure and hold you accountable that it gets put in place. So it ranges from, we had heard, for example, three concrete things. One, that officers wear the mourning badge that has the black tape on it. People believed that that was being done intentionally to hide the serial number.
Yeah.
There's a tradition where officers do that when someone falls in the line of duty. We require every officer to have their name right there. So every picture you see of the badge is the officer's name there, but it's important to people. So Chief Best and I have talked, we're going to change it. We're going to make sure officers can wear that badge, but the serial number or their badge number can be visible.
How do you in general think Seattle police have performed these last few days?
I think it's been a very, very challenging time depending on the day. And I think if you look at the last 2 days, where there have been tens of thousands of protesters in the street marching, you have seen the bike patrols have a very low profile, marching with them, closing.
Some of that came from WTO, I remember.
And
right?
Not a single conflict. You saw Saturday night, I think, in many ways symbolize the challenge that we faced early on was in Westlake Center, thousands of people gathered, thousands of people to protest, to hear speaks from Andre Taylor and others. They marched to the federal courthouse, and there was no conflicts with police. Yet a block away, there was a completely different story where cars were set on fire and there were rocks and Molotov cocktails thrown by members of people who came clearly to cause conflict. And so in the peaceful protests, we've done really well. But I think what we've seen is at the end of the night when people have to disperse, we need to work on how we do that because it has not ended well any night. And the chief knows that. We've asked the Office of Inspector General to review all the policies again, which are all court approved. But there's a huge amount of distrust in the community because of that, and we've got to get better at de-escalating that.
Well, something clearly needs to be fixed because we've got 14,000 complaints, and that's just from the, checking on it this morning.
Yeah, so I will say on that is, I met with Andrew Meyerberg, who's the head of OPA. Of those 14,000 complaints, it boils down, I think, to really 8 incidents. And a number of people.
I thought it was 10. But
it could be 10 now. When I talked to him, it was 8.
Yeah.
But a number of people, saw the same thing and through social media. I think it's a good sign that many people are engaged and they trust OPA to look at it.
Yeah, absolutely. So somewhere it said that 11,000 of the complaints were about a single pepper spraying of a child. So that was one of the incidents. Would it be better for everybody? This is one of these woulda, couldas, and I understand that. If the disciplinary changes that were asked for by the community and ordered by the federal consent decree were already part of the contract with the police union.
So the court hasn't ordered any disciplinary changes. And we're in the process right now with the court to determine which disciplinary changes the court will accept. He's identified 4 things, and all 4 of those things I and the city council have said are going to be the priority in the next contract.
I see. Okay, I want to bring in my audience here because we really welcome our audience to ask questions. And I'm not playing pocket backgammon here or anything. So one of the questions has to do with, can you give some examples? You've been thinking of this, I'm sure. Some examples of how the city can better hold SPD accountable, before this and after this.
So the community spent almost 10 years building a new accountability system, including the Office of Inspector General, which is fairly new. We've got to make sure it has the resources and functions. And we have to show that in this most difficult time that office and the Office of Police Accountability and the Community Police Commission actually are durable reform and oversight. I think it's going to be a real test, but I met with each of them to ensure them that I would make sure they had whatever resources they needed to handle the increased work, because we got to do it transparently, we got to do it expeditiously, and we've got to show that we can do it, because I think the oversight that is in place can work, but we've got to show that it can work.
So you mentioned a couple minutes ago, we sort of have to figure out a way to end these nightly events in a better way, and that you're committed to doing that. Should we stop using these flashbangs Is that a solution?
There's just one of the things that the community asked the chief in the meeting.
Yeah,
and
the one just now.
The one we just had. And I think that we have to review how we do crowd management. The current policies in place were actually developed in conjunction and reviewed by the federal court monitor and approved by the court. But I think we need to look at different ways to do this. And so I've asked the Office Inspector General to review those policies and recommend changes. I want to hear from community on changes. I want Chief Best to be thinking about ways that we can de-escalate and use different policies. When you have that many protesters, you'll see that when people are peaceful, it was fine. At the end, when it degenerated, it wasn't, and we have to find a better way forward.
The city attorney, right before we met here today, withdrew the motion to end the consent decree. This was, I don't know if it was a surprise to anybody. The judge will do what the judge wants to do anyway. But are you in favor of sort of holding back and waiting till we get through some of these
Absolutely.
issues?
And I just really want to make clear there was never a motion to end the consent decree. It was just to end what was called the sustainment plan, which the judge said we already met those 6 things. Right. We'd still committed that we were going to come back to the court to address the accountability and discipline issues. And so we were never
going to
be
part of a police contract.
Right, but the consent decree wasn't ending. But this, I think, look, we need to take a pause. I think that the SPD, we showed that they've met and the court agreed. But look, with what's going on right now, we need to engage more people for more durable accountability going forward.
So a couple of the videos, and I'm wary of videos in maybe the same way that many people are, because they don't always, they sometimes fail to show you what happened prior. And so here's a video, but it occurs at a moment in time. But a couple of the videos, are very concerning. An officer punching a protester on the ground, and another video of another officer kneeling on the shoulders of a protester, and then a sort of a colleague, a different officer, pulling that knee off. It's hard to unsee these. What do you make of some of these videos?
Both of them are being investigated, and the Office of Police Accountability. I think the chief may have referred both of those. We discussed both of them when we saw them. The one thing about the officer with the knee that gave me some hope was his colleague immediately moved it, and he said no. And there's no excuse for that. Look, particularly at this time, the way that Mr. Floyd was killed and murdered, you can't do that as a police officer. We can't tolerate that, Seattle Police Department.
And those fires the other day, I think that may have had something to do with the tears. Seattle used to be the one city in the country that didn't like cars on fire during its protests. So what happened there?
I think that showed us that it wasn't just here in Seattle, it was across the nation. I've talked to a number of the mayors, and there were fires in almost every major city. And it's one of the reasons why the police have taken the posture they have, because we saw peaceful protests change immediately when people bent on violence came, and capable of great violence and destruction.
President Trump told America's governors the other day that, that if they didn't clean up the cities and keep the peace, that the president was going to send in the national military force. Will they be allowed in Seattle?
They won't be allowed in Seattle. I made that very clear. And this is from a guy who can't even get to a closed church without tear gas. We don't need him to tell us how to do anything in our city.
But how can you legally keep the federal government out? As I understand it, and I was reading pretty deep into these laws, there's an 1807 law, the insurrection law, in which they can go into a city, the federal government. But usually it's with a request from a state or a city.
Right, and the Posse Comitatus law prohibits the American military from being used for domestic law enforcement. That's the law of the United States. He can't change that. And it also greatly underestimates and doesn't understand how the American military works or operates. They're trained to fight an enemy, and the American people and people protesting are not an enemy. In fact, they are upholding the best values of our country by exercising their First Amendment rights.
Do you wish that you had told downtown business in advance to maybe board up, or you just had no sense that you just couldn't have predicted that kind of looting and stuff would happen.
I don't think anyone anticipated the level of destruction that was coming. And I will say, again, if you look at the thousands of people who were in and around Westlake, they protested for a very long time and marched with no conflicts, no violence. A number of people came with a specific purpose to create destruction and violence and to start a fight with police. And the destruction was, I've never seen anything like it in the city of Seattle, even during WTO.
I've heard a lot of people say that. Those folks who came and had, I heard, your press conference and you were talking about the backpacks full of, frozen water bottles and Molotov cocktails. And there's some argument about whether these folks came in from somewhere else or whether they're from here. And I read the Danny Westney piece in the Seattle Times, and he tracked many of them are our own local folks. So I don't know that the argument that there's all these outside agitators actually...
Yeah. And I've never said there's outside agitators. I've made it really clear.
There were some national stories mostly on that.
Right. But I made it really clear is the distinction was not where they were from, but what they intended to do.
Yeah.
And it was clear that they came for violence and destruction.
So I want to pivot a little bit to the topic we invited you here for originally. Remember that?
Meanwhile, we're still in a pandemic.
Yeah, that one. We're still in a pandemic. So King County will soon move to Phase 1 modified reopening. And the governor's office, though, has been saying that the protests themselves may have set King County back a little bit in this effort. What's your biggest concern about reopening?
That's a significant concern, and I talked to Dr. Duchin, the King County Public Health Officer, today about that very thing. And so we're looking very carefully. We would see that if these protests led to increased infections, it takes usually at least a week to 2 weeks. Right. So we're trying to prepare for hospitals and testing and looking for any uptick. We really want to make sure that that doesn't set us back. Our numbers.
I did notice walking through the crowds today that the way to get from one place to another, I had to give up all my distancing to get in this building, for example.
No, and they're protesting in very close proximity. Many of them aren't wearing masks. Most of them probably weren't exposed before, and so those kinds of large events are events that we've seen throughout the country can lead to greater spread and transmission.
So let me take a quick audience question here. Would you, okay, this is a complicated one, but would you consider a community policing model for SPD to increase trust? We have some community policing.
Yes, we have, and we have a community policing model, but I think we've got to re-examine it. And I think we have to go back to a place, in policing, I think, happens differently in different communities, to really make sure, number one, that officers policing a community, if we can, are from the community. And so they have that trust to begin with, get people out of cars and walking so they know who's in the neighborhoods, who's in the businesses, and build that real trust of, guardian instead of warrior.
So will the Seattle of the future ever be the same as it was before coronavirus? It's hard to remember all these things with a thriving downtown. I've heard, and you've probably talked to some of the same business people, that there's a sense that many of these shops may never come back. Nordstrom may not be thrive.
I think that, look, until we find the vaccine or treatments, no city in America is going to be what it was before, including Seattle. But I believe we will come back, and I believe we will come back differently. I mean, it will change our city forever. But that, for example, once the virus is gone, people will start to travel again and move again. We'll work in different ways. And I think we have to reimagine our city. I think people will, a lot of people like working from home. For other people, it's really hard.
Right.
But, people want to be able to leave their house and either walk or bike to 5 minutes to a restaurant or a business that they like. And so I think we'll see also a gravitation back to neighborhood commercial districts.
Are those the 15-minute cities? Is that what those are called? Explain that.
Yeah.
I don't.
So the mayor of Paris she found it in hers, and Paris is different because it's a bunch of cities within a city, but it's that anyone from their home should be able to walk and in 15 minutes get whatever they need. And I think that we really do have to reimagine how we live. And I also think, look, companies are not going to have all their workers work in a downtown office place anymore.
Well, what about that? Because that actually could be a disadvantage for Seattle if you have Facebook and Amazon and Microsoft, and if everybody starts to love working at home so much, that really changes where people might live. They may not need to live in an expensive city like
right.
this.
I think it'll change where people live. I think it'll change how the city grows. I think it will change how we do our work. But I think at the end of the day, cities have existed as long as there have been nations and communities of different size. And I think that there's still enough to pull people together. We're just going to have to reimagine what it looks like and how people function and operate within that city. I think it gives us great opportunity. I mean, one of the
Would we be left with a bunch of empty, gleaming towers? No.
I think we won't. I just think we have to have greater imagination than that. Seattle burned to the ground in the 1800s, and people thought, could it come back? It came back stronger. We were economically devastated when Boeing left town. We came back even stronger and different. We just have to reinvent ourselves again, but there's enough people, enough grit, enough brilliance here that I think we will.
Well, thinking about that, you are part of this international COVID-19 task force, chaired by the Mayor Milan, but you're one of the 11 mayors that's co-chair there. And the idea, and I found this really interesting, was to have an economic recovery after COVID that improves public health, reduces inequality, and addresses climate change, which is a lot to accomplish. But maybe coronavirus could provide some kind of an opportunity.
I think it's true, and I think it's the same opportunity that these protests are providing us. That when we come back, we've got to close those inequities that existed before but have been laid so stark by these two events. By the pandemic, where the people who suffered the greatest health consequences and the greatest economic consequences are the same communities of color who are taking to the streets in protest because they've been left behind in every governmental system we have.
So thinking about these buildings, thinking about the city of the future, will we embrace density as we did with the same intensity that we did before coronavirus?
I think we will, but I think it will look different. I mean, we saw one of the first withdrawals from the market where one of the big companies that was going to build a large apartment complex and mixed use.
Oh, Omni did that, right?
Yeah, and has put a pause on it because I think they're waiting to see how all cities adjust to this. Yeah. I think you'll see people will continue to want to live downtown and have all those amenities, but I also think you'll have more density and different kinds of densities in neighborhoods. I think you're going to see more townhouses and row houses and small apartment buildings where people think, I don't want to live downtown, but I want to have more parks, more commercial districts that I can walk to, whether it's in Columbia City or Georgetown or South Park. And so I think that we will have more density, but it will be different than we imagined.
Well, one of the permanent changes of coronavirus is the streets that closed. Something like 23 miles of streets will be closed permanently for biking, running, walking, all of that. Sounds good in June, but what is that going to be like in the rain? I mean, how are people going to be able to maneuver around that in the foul weather?
Yeah. Look, we're not fair weather people here. If we didn't go outside when it was raining, we'd be inside for 9 months out of the year. So I think these streets are going to be great because, look, most of them were what we called greenways anyway. They should have been local access. People can still get to their house, but if you slow people down, give people more space, and actually have a neighborhood that feels more like a community, I think it's a positive, great thing. It's good for the climate. It's good for community.
Lake Washington Boulevard, though, in a survey came out as the #1 street that people would close permanently if they voted on it. And then I heard that we weren't going to close that. Is that one of the streets that
we do bicycle Sundays in the summer, and so we've got a model for it. It's changed over the years on how much it's used as main arterial, particularly when you get into Leschi. But along the lake, I think we should look at closing it more often.
So another thing that may change quite dramatically after coronavirus is mass transit. The city was pretty anti-car, before coronavirus, but people use their cars to go to things like drive-through testing. Do you think the city of the future will promote the mass in mass transit?
I think absolutely. I think it's going to be harder to get people back on transit during the pandemic. And I sit on the board of Sound Transit and have talked to Metro because, of course, we have our own levy that supports buses. We got to change how we do business there too, so people feel safe. But there's some people that don't have a car and don't have the luxury of driving in, and we still want to encourage people not to be in single occupancy vehicles. So we've got to change how people pay. For example, they don't have to touch money or touch this. We have to spread out the seats. I think all of that operation.
Masks required, right?
Masks required. I think we just have to take a different approach to that through this pandemic.
And I'm going to my phone again, not taking like
Playing
a phone call.
backgammon again?
Not taking a call or anything like that. I'll just read you one
Could
from
I
here.
talk to whoever it is?
Yeah, of course. It's clear from video footage that SPD is using excessive and disproportional force. Will you commit to intervene and ban the use of tear gas, flash-banned devices, and rubber bullets by police?
Yeah, I think we just talked about that. I think we absolutely have to look at all the range of...
We talked about the flash.
Yeah, all of that is in the same policy that relates to crowd management that was approved by the federal court, but I think we have to look and find a different way. Seattle's always been a city willing to innovate on everything, including policing. And we have to find a way to de-escalate those circumstances. I do want to say, it was very real that on Saturday night in particular, that police were attacked. And so their views on why they have to wear more tactical gear were based on fact. But look, if we're going to move forward for trust and build that city of the future, we've also got to have the police department that everybody wants.
You said that a lot of decisions about how we go forward will be in the hands of Chief Carmen Best. What's that about? What is going on with that as an approach to the police?
So, as you know, the chief of police under our city charter is the charter responsibility for managing the police department. And Carmen Best came up through the department. She knows every part of that department, and there's no one more committed to making sure that it serves community. These have been enormously difficult times for Chief Best, too. And she's both wants to give voice to and recognize the community, particularly as a black woman herself, but also has, a deep commitment to make sure she holds her officers accountable, but also supports them in the ways they need to be supported.
As we go forward, do you have any concerns that on coronavirus, that we're reopening too quickly, that people are sort of like, it's spring, it's summer, it's time to they've been in their houses for a long, long time. Is there any sense that it's going too quickly, or do you think it's sort of measured in the right way?
I worry about it very much. I think that the thousands of people gathering in the street have created a whole different factor that no one had thought about. For 2 months, everybody stayed home, and now we're having marches every day of thousands of people. And I think we're going to have to really carefully monitor what impact that has on the increase in the virus. The King County Public Health has put in a place to test and trace and isolate, but I think it could be tested sooner than we want to.
At the beginning of coronavirus, it was interesting to me to observe that for Seattle and King County, you sent the scientists out front, the health officers out front. The governor did that for a while, but then began having these sort of regular press conferences. Did doing that in any way make you and King County Executive Dow Constantine seem like you were not the key people to handle coronavirus?
I think it was the right thing to do. We heard really clearly, and I think it's true, from public health officials, that the number one important thing is for the public to hear a consistent message and for their elected leaders to be on the same page. And so Dow Constantine and I, as well as the executives from Snohomish County, Pierce County, and the mayors of Tacoma and Everett, are regularly in the meetings with the governor talking about what policies are the right policies. And there's some very, very active dialogue. And from that has come cohesive policies. The governor ultimately had the authority. You know, we in Seattle could go a different direction if we wanted, but I don't think that's the right thing. I think having a very clear message that is based on science and public health was really important and was a really big contrast with what was happening in the federal level. There still today needs to be more federal action. We are going to be suffering as a city because of the lack of federal action. No city in America should be on a scavenger hunt for tests. You know, it's ridiculous, but yet we're buying some from foreign countries. We need America manufacturing in the game, and we need them to be manufacturing all the test equipment we need, all the PPE, all the vaccines, and it can only happen if the president makes it happen.
You testified virtually last week before Congress, talking about we need to end the Hunger Games among cities having to get some of their own equipment. Is there any improvement on any of that?
There hasn't been yet. I mean, the improvement is now we're putting together consortiums with other cities. So the West Coast cities have formed a consortium to try to buy some of this stuff together so that we don't keep bidding against each other.
Isn't our testing doing better, though, these days?
We're doing much better.
We have more tests, I
We
think.
do have more tests, but it has been a struggle, and we're not sure whether we have enough supplies on a continuous basis to keep doing what we need to do. We need to do significantly more testing than we were doing, significantly more. And again, the city of Seattle is trying to acquire our own ability to test and not rely just on the state or the federal government. We're stepping up. In fact, we'll be standing up. We stood up the first site in the country where first responders tested first responders so that we make sure that our fire and police didn't have to be pulled off the line. And we're going to be standing up our own testing sites for the people of Seattle to be able to get tested and drive through or walk through.
Well, thank you very much. We have way too much to discuss.
I know
with
there's
you.
so much to talk about.
So much to talk about. We have been catching up with Seattle Mayor Joni Durkan. Thanks so much, Mayor, for being here. We're coming right back with Andre Taylor. He's the leader of the group, Not This Time. Thank you.
Thanks, Joni.
Thanks for doing this. And we are back. Civic Cocktail returns with Andre Taylor, founder and executive director of Not This Time, a police reform and racial justice organization. Hi, Andre. Thank you so much for coming back. You've been on Civic Cocktail before.
We've done this before.
This is it.
Yeah.
We're very glad to have you
Thank
here.
you.
I know you've been asked this question a couple times, so do bear with me.
Sure.
But how did you feel when you spent so much time organizing and delivering a peaceful protest last weekend, only to have it sort of, I have to look for the right word, but like changed by a more violent group?
Well, I don't think it was changed because we had, again, not only a peaceful but a successful rally with 10,000 plus people from Westlake all the way to
Amazing number.
the federal courthouse. And so there was not one incidence of violence. So that is success, you know. You go out there and you tell the people what you expect of them and what you want. You deliver the messaging. Your stuff is completed. You can build upon that completion of success. It's the other things out there that you can't build upon. We've seen these situations. I don't know why particularly our city or any city is stunned by what's going on, because we've seen it over and over and over again. We've seen neo-Nazi groups and white supremacist groups and anarchists come into this space to distract and to do what they do, right? But it never lasts. It goes away and it never manifests nothing, so I'm not going to be distracted by it. That's the police's job.
You have said that. You have said that it's up to police to deal with those who infiltrated. How, in general, do you think police performed here in the last few days?
It's hard to have a grade because it's not completed. I can grade what we did because it's completed.
Yes.
Right? I know there's been complaints, and I can understand how it's hard for the police probably to navigate in between peoples that have infiltrated into protesters. So you have protesters and you have rioters and you have looters. Those are three different things. And the media has been clumping those three together. So when you have a looter and a rioter on purpose that infiltrates protesters to create issues, then how do you deal with that, right? How can you deal with who is who? You know, they're good at what they do. They've had a concerted effort around the country to infiltrate or rallies like this on purpose. I heard somebody say when they have, when they had the rally about opening up the country, there was never no violence there. You know, so when it comes down to black people, trying to say, listen, these things are wrong in our country, then there so happens to be all these ruckus and, things that are going on. So, I think we have to know who the real enemy is.
So right before this show started, I believe you were one of the folks in the meeting with the mayor.
I was.
What are the key things that you asked her for, and how receptive
Well, I
did you
came down
find her?
there just, because I know that there were young people that wanted some answers. But let me just say this, I have 6 kids. I know young folks because I know my own kids, and I know there's
It's a good way to get to know them.
Well, yeah. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. And they wear me out. I'm glad that they're grown now, right? But they have a tendency to want something kind of instantaneous, right? And they kind of want to do things their own way. Even my own kids, people often say to me, your kids, are very lucky because the amount of information and knowledge that you have. And I say, well, my kids are. I mean, I have one that's graduated Yale and UCLA. Other ones are married to some military guys. But they want to do things their own way. And so when you have somebody that want to do things their own way and they are really strong-willed about that, you know, it's a challenge when you are an older person with maybe wisdom and they are younger. The scriptures say they call the young because they're strong and call the old because they're wise. So that dichotomy, dealing with that within young folks is a challenge because you want them to be able to express themselves and grow into their own experience. You want that, right? But you are so cautious for them doing so because you know you've made mistakes in your life and you know some of the things that they can be, you know, going a certain direction could hurt them.
But I'm asking you in that meeting just a couple hours ago, what did you go in seeking and what do you think you came out of there with?
In the meeting, I'm going to tell you what I said. I spoke to those young people.
Okay, I see that.
Yeah.
I see.
See? So there was a theme in there and everybody was telling the mayor what we want you to do, what we want you to do. So I told them, I said, listen, don't ever cede your power to anybody. And activism is about what you are going to do. Right? What you are going to do. I don't want you to think that you don't have the ability nor the power or the genius to do what you want to do. And then you build power based upon what you want to do. And then when you go to somebody, it's not an ask, it's a force.
But I would like to know just a little bit more about some of the specifics. In other words, you're talking about sort of the pacing of what was asked for.
Well, the young people were, let me just say that because I don't want to denigrate anybody. I support these young people. But you have to understand with passionate young people that are doing things for the first time.
There's that. Do
you understand?
Yeah, there's that.
That people can be all over the place. You understand?
Indeed.
So I just try to give a little foundation for people to operate within their space and genius without discouraging young folks to operate, you know?
So it sounds like they ask for some things that maybe, it's not that you don't support them, but you might not have prioritized for something.
Again, they were asking for the system to do something that the system has never done for us. And I was just mainly saying to them, it's going to have to be within you to get done what you want to get done. And you have the power to do so.
So if we
and
didn't,
that wasn't all of them, that was just some of them.
Yeah, so but a few things that kind of give you hope that they asked for and you thought the mayor actually could or would deliver, something like that.
Probably just an ongoing conversation.
So that is something.
That is very much so
something important.
Yeah, that is very much so something.
So I asked the mayor the same thing, and you know, under any other circumstances that were not coronavirus, we would have had you both in the same room.
Sure. We've been in the same room many times.
Answered some of the same question, but President Trump has said that he would like to send the military into cities that can't stop their own violence.
Sure.
How would that work in the situation that we have, which we're trying to be productive?
Well, then you're talking about a man that lacks leadership and has elevated what I believe his idea of economics over principle. So a person like that will say anything just to change the subject, you know what I'm saying? And we have seen that he have done that often. So about him bringing the military, and I've heard the mayor earlier before I came in. And,
oh, were you watching? Yeah.
Right. So I'm encouraged from hearing the governor. I had to leave that meeting with the mayor earlier because I had to get on the line with the governor. So there were some things that were asked of the governor about that, and he said that that won't happen. So hearing it from the governor and hearing it from the mayor, it's reassuring.
That won't happen.
Yes.
Coronavirus, there is a connection here. It impacted communities of color more than others. Do you think that is part of why, and you're referring to the young people, but they're all ages, people feel so fragile now, so needing to express themselves in these
let me explain it to you like this, Joni. COVID-19, what it did is, I always say God put everybody on punishment. Right? Everybody was in the room. You couldn't go out the house. You're on punishment. You're on restriction.
Oh,
right?
on punishment.
Yeah. In our communities, it's called punishment. In your community, it's called what? Restriction, or timeout. Let's just say that. So, a timeout.
Good one.
So anyway, and there's a lot of bend-up frustration because people couldn't leave their homes. So now when an incident happens like this, that's already bad, then you have to now put on top of that the stress of what COVID-19 has placed everybody that has been marinating over a period of time. So when people come out, in addition to this George Floyd situation, now you've intensified it 100-fold. So now the potential of violence is extremely high because people are like pissed off, and they're not going to take it anymore.
But think about it also, just the protests themselves, there was no 6 feet of spacing or distancing.
That tells you how committed people are to causes, that they're willing to put their lives on the line. And that's what happened. Let me just say this. I was talking to a news outlet, and I said, let me explain something to you so that you can understand the temperature of the country. When you beat a people to a pulp, if it is the objective of law enforcement around this country and this country also to beat a people to a pulp, as you have done black people, to submit them as you have done black people, right? To beat them so much in whatever area of life that we've tried to exalt ourselves in until we're underneath the bottom. You've accomplished that. Let me just say that. But the problem in that is that when you do that to a people, they stop fearing and they stop being afraid to die. Because they're going to say, you're going to kill me when you pull me over in the car. You're going to kill me when I'm jogging down the street. You're going to kill me when I'm in the park. And since you're going to kill me then, I'm going to hold court in the street. And I'm going to get home to my mom. I'm going to get home to my brother. I'm going to get home to my children. I'm going to get home to my husband and wife. And whatever I got to do right now, because I have the evidence that America cares nothing about us, we're going to do it. So that's the temperature that you're seeing right now.
Yeah.
Do you understand that?
Yeah. I mean, I thought it was maybe helpful to everybody, and it was a side point. It was a small note.
Well, I just want you to understand how serious things are, because sometimes when people get in on these things, they're not giving you the truth.
That's why we're glad to have you
Exactly.
to make those points for us.
Thank you for that.
Yeah. I did notice, though, that the Parks Department, and I don't know who thought this up, but I thought it was kind of a good idea, was at some of the protests handing out masks. And trying to say, yes, of course, this is the passion, but let's not jeopardize people further.
Well, I don't know if the Parks Department, before I even had, because you don't have all the information, before I even had the march, I talked to the mayor and Carmen Best. They asked, what can they do? So I said, well, at least you can have the law enforcement out there passing out masks and water.
Well, good. It was your idea.
Yeah. So
very good.
So not only that, but also executive consulting office called and also brought more masks also. So people wanted to try to do what they want to do. You know, a little bit of you know, just trying to understand.
So I'm going to my phone here. I'm not just reading news headlines or anything. Here's an audience question, and we really try to involve our audience here. So. If you had a single request of Mayor Durkan, something she could act on immediately, what would that be?
I wouldn't ask Mayor Durkan, because I understand it's bigger than Mayor Durkan, right?
But you met with her, you asked her for something.
I don't ask people for nothing. I create power like I did with Initiative 940, and we force people to do things, right? I just told you earlier what I told those young people. I told them that out of my own experiences. So black people cannot afford to be going over there playing from a position of weakness, playing a victim. At this point right now, we have to stand up, realize our own power, our own capacity to change things, and with our own genius, make sure it gets done. So I wouldn't go to Mayor just and say, would you please do this for me? Yeah. I will create power first, and then I will tell her, this is what you should do, or this is what the consequences are. The voters, and do you understand?
Oh, of course, yeah. Yes, I understand that it's a sort of a different position to be approaching it from. Yes, of course. But what is a step that the city, or you said you spoke to the governor?
Well, one of the biggest steps is to do something about SPOG. SPOG has been an impediment to change in this city forever. Right? I have organized for over 4+ years. I have brought other law enforcement agencies in, other communities.
So SPOG, just for our audience, is Seattle Police Officers Guild.
Yeah, I'm just talking about all the people that we have brought in, from Patty Murray to Pramila Jayapal to the mayor to the police chief and on. Even the governor was a part of 940. And every community meeting that I asked SPOG to come to, they resisted and said no. So right now, SPOG is an impediment to this change. That's one of them.
Okay.
And the SPOG contract that should have been accepted in 2017, that City Hall, that I'm still pissed off with to this day, went along with SPOG and did not accept the things and what we had put forth as a community in 2017 that held police officers accountable.
So we're still on that disciplinary thing. It's not in the police contract yet.
Exactly.
That's what's holding up the whole.
So until whoever the powers that be make sure we go back to what was agreed on, what City Hall unanimously voted on, we're going to have a damn problem.
You mentioned Initiative 940.
Yes.
And actually, you were on the show discussing
And
that.
Joni, I'm not mad at you. I'm just talking.
No, oh, I'm good. I'm
Okay.
good. We're good. We're good. As we noted on the phone
Yeah.
yesterday, we're all good. You led Initiative 940 a few years ago.
Sure.
And successfully changed the law on
Yes.
police misconduct. How could that effort on 940 help other cities, other states at this time?
People call me from around the country and ask how we did it. And what I tell them is that, listen, it's extremely important changing the law, but equally important is the implementation of that law. So within 940, we wrote that community had to be at the table during the implementation process so that law enforcement would not water down 940. So we've been in that process for a very, very, well, maybe a year, right? But COVID prevented us from the ending part of locking the implementation down. So a lot of things that are going on right now, we still don't have the law implemented so the law could have bite. So when an officer has behavior the way that we've seen over there in Minnesota, we can hold them accountable.
So to COVID slowed a lot of things down.
Yes,
we know that.
exactly.
But what was the piece? And there's some talk that the implementation hasn't been completed.
No, it's
and
not.
that they might even need a legislative session, part of a legislative session to address that.
940 wasn't everything, but 940 was the ability to let people know that they have the power to control their city and their state. We were always going to build on the foundation of 940. It was the foundation, a foundation of change. But we're not finished with it because there's other things that we want to do. But you got to have a foundation to build from. You have to set the precedent first, right? So that's what we're doing right now.
Well, I don't want to be nosy here, but with the did the governor call
Well, why
about
you being nosy then?
That's how we talk, you and I. Because I'm a journalist, and that's a setup for a question, and usually successful.
That's right.
While we're at it. So was the governor asking about what parts of 940 still need to be completed, something like that?
Tony, let me explain something to you again because I want you to get it real clearly. We're not into asking nobody. We're not into asking the government.
Okay, but when you guys were talking...
Rephrase it, reporter.
Let me do it in your way.
Okay.
When you were talking to the governor, did you present the power of the idea?
Well, what
Something
we
like
wanted to
that.
do was make sure that we completed the implementation stage where we had something concrete. It would make it easier to go back into legislation and policy after it was concrete. So the governor has supported everything we wanted
Yeah.
to do, and he's still in support of it. So as we continue to build upon it, I'm sure he will support it as well.
Do you think that the effort today by the city attorney, who wants to say that the federal consent decree that Seattle is still living under,
I think that's
should
very
be delayed? Did you think that was a good
I
idea?
think that's very smart. I know Pete Holmes. I built relationships with all people. I think that is very, very smart because there was going to be problems there. There was going to be big problems. And listen, when you galvanize Washington State, 60% of the state voted for 940. Guess how many in King County? 71%. So now that's voters, right? So
That is a
now
vote.
you
I
can
looked it up.
galvanize voters. Now you
Yes.
can tell people, if you don't do the right thing, we're going to vote you the hell out of here. I'm sorry, I shouldn't be saying that on your
Beep.
thing. Yeah. So again, I think Pete Holmes was smart to do what he did.
Okay, this is an audience question. Since Mayor Durkan isn't willing to acknowledge Black Lives Matter and protester demands, is the movement willing to consider implementing, and you'd have to explain this, Obama's My Brother's Keeper community initiatives?
I don't know where they got that the mayor does not support Black Lives Matter. I've never heard her say that at one time. As a matter of fact, I've heard her speak strongly against...
She did here this evening.
She said she's not supportive of Black Lives Matter?
This is a questioner whose name I can't tell you because I don't know, but is saying, since Mayor Durkan isn't willing to acknowledge Black Lives Matter and protester demands.
Oh, well, I don't know whether she did that. Now, if we have it on record, that gives me something to go have a conversation with her about. But I don't want to say what she didn't say until I got the evidence, So, yeah, I don't know about that. Because people were in the room, she acknowledged everything they said. So again, just the acknowledgement of what you're asking people to do don't mean anything if you don't have power behind it. So I'm not, I don't want to go just hearing lip service. We've heard that for over 50 years of politicians and the like with lip service. We're going to do this, we're going to do this, we're going to do this. I'm not interested in somebody telling me what they're going to do because you haven't done nothing for 50 plus years. We've been in this country 400, let me just say that. So it's time for us to be able to do something different. So listen, don't even take it like this. So we've been marching for all these years. Marching is to get acknowledgement of things that's going on. But marching is not going to change the law, it's not going to change policy, and it's not going to change people's policy. You have to force people into change.
But you changed the law.
Because we forced them to do it with the people. We changed it with the people, is what I'm trying to explain to you. That means building power. So it's hard to try to communicate a strategy of how you go about doing things because we've done something a little different that others haven't done, which is why we are the first and only state with a police accountability law. So I'm trying to kind of explain to your audience some of the fundamentals of how we got that change, right?
Yes.
So I make sure that I'm not distracted. Why, when we have the winning component, that I allow myself to be distracted by anything that's not winning, that hasn't been winning over 50, 60, 70 years? When we have something that we can not only lead Washington, but the whole country with, if we continue to build upon that, right? So you have to be really tunnel vision because there's a million distractions.
Have you heard from many other states that they would like to do
Absolutely.
what they're doing in Washington?
Oh, my word, absolutely.
Some of the states that you've talked to?
Yeah, California, down to Chicago. I've talked to Philadelphia. I've talked to activists from everywhere. Yeah.
And so do you think you'll be involved in some of those efforts?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But what I won't do is go in there like I'm big old. I will go in there and build with the people on the ground that's doing the work on the ground. Then
I see.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, you don't want to be big old.
No.
And
then you don't go in like that. You respect the people that's doing the work where they're at.
Right. Well, what concrete change? This is quite a moment in our city. Let's be clear about that.
And in our country.
And in our country, absolutely. What concrete change do you think is coming to our city, our state, as a result of what's been going on these last 5 days?
I don't think it's a result. That's kind of an insult to the people that have suffered in our country for hundreds of years.
I mean progress. Progress.
Okay. But let me just say there's many George Floyds that we don't know about. And out of respect for them and the people that have fought and died before, I want to say it's not these 5 days, right?
That's fair. That's entirely fair. Absolutely.
We had to build to these 5 days,
right?
You're
right. Yeah. You're right about that.
So now, within this time setting, I believe in timing. Things has a season and a time to change. And I feel that I'm very, very responsible for what I must do in my change. But we have to deal with this thing with tentacles, right? Where one person does this within their genius and expertise, and 7 other people do it in their genius and expertise in order to come at this situation that's been an issue for 400 years for my people, right? Yeah. So the fact that we have understood that people have talked to us that don't work anymore, that's a shift, right? The fact that we can come together and mobilize, and now we have white allies, that's a shift. On Saturday, I don't know if you know, but I gave white allies an assignment. Do you know that?
I read something about that, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So my assignment to white allies was this. Listen, I know when you come to our organizations or even rallies, that your thought is that you are there to give black people space and give them a voice. I said that is the wrong messaging.
Go ahead.
It is insulting for you to think you can give us a space or a voice. We've been doing this for a very, very long time, and we've been doing it from the position of, of our condition in this country. What I want you to do, white folks, as I have done, with the passion of my organizing throughout this state, I want you to take that same passion with your privilege, with the power of your privilege, and I want you to infiltrate your own community. I want you with the same passion to infiltrate your own, and don't relinquish your privilege. Don't you ever relinquish your privilege. You can't help us with you relinquish your privilege by you thinking that that's going to benefit us. It's not going to benefit us. You keep your privilege, but you then infiltrate your own people with that privilege And then once you have done the organizing, you bring that to us. And when you're operating in your privilege and your genius, and we as a people are operating in our might and our genius, then we can get things done faster than you can ever imagine.
Okay, not meaning to offend with choice of words, but I would like to know, after this time, what concrete change you think we really might be able to achieve.
I just explained to you what I think we could achieve. I told you.
It seemed more like a process.
Everything is a process. You know, if you think you're going to get microwave oven overnight, let me tell you, I strategize 5 years out so that I won't get caught up in the ebb and flow of the disappointments and the crushing of what is being seen in our communities, right? If I didn't have a 5-year plan, the mere pain and agony of what continually is done to people in our community all over the country, the ebb and flow of that, I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. So I have to have a 5-year plan that even though a situation like George Floyd happens, I deal with it, but I know that I have to get to that 5-year plan to deal with it for real, right? To rectify it for real.
Okay, so on a more granular level, I guess, then the mayor in here just a little bit ago conceded that the city isn't very good at crowd dispersal and said something she wants to change. What would you recommend to her to change about the way the city has been going about that?
Well, listen, that's not my lane. You know what I'm saying? That's not my lane. I know that there's young people and white people out there that are overwhelmed by the treachery and just the savagery in which this white police officer killed George Floyd, the cavalier attitude with his hands in his pocket, him knowing that witnesses around, him knowing that cameras were watching him and saying, I don't care if any camera all over the world is watching what I'm doing. I'm a white male officer and I'm going to show you I could do this. The savagery of that. I'm going to show you that nothing could happen to me. I'm going to show you that black people are nothing. That's different. That's like smudging it in our faces, right?
Yeah.
That's the difference, if you want to know a difference. So, again, when you're talking about dispersing the crowd that are now compelled by that savagery that the whole world has seen, this is something different. It's a very, very difficult situation to navigate.
So on a slightly more positive note, what does it mean to you when police officers take a knee with the protesters? Does that mean maybe that these entities can work together?
The only time, taking a knee, I understand that. But when you stand up when an officer does something that's inappropriate, that's much better. Taking a knee is okay. But
I'm talking about the officers taking the knee.
That's what I'm talking about. I said when an officer stands up and sees another officer that has done something inappropriate, wrong, devastating, when they stand up and say something about that taking a knee means nothing. We need principled officers when they see something. You know what they say to the community? When you see something, say something. Yeah, that's what we're asking you to do. When you see something, do something.
Well, we did have an example of one police officer. The mayor and I discussed it. I don't know if you were there in time watching it. One police officer here in Seattle, knee on a protester.
Okay, that's a good beginning.
And then here's the moment.
That's a good
the
beginning.
other officer comes over and pushes his knee away.
Yeah,
in other words, I'm
it.
teaching you.
Okay, that's good. But let me tell you, I talked to Dan Satterberg during us doing 940. We had a great candid conversation, and I asked him a question because they're always saying there's good cops out there. So I said, if a good cop sees a bad cop acting badly, and he doesn't do anything, is he considered a good cop? Right?
Yeah.
Dan said, I seen it happen one time. And what they did to him to destroy him was a lesson to any other officer. Now, this, you can talk to Dan because he told me that.
Yeah, I'll be happy to.
You know what I'm saying?
But, I mean, the story is, you can elaborate a little bit.
The story is another cop tried to stand up and say something.
I see.
And police destroyed him for trying to say something. right? All the club and the blue line destroyed him for trying to speak up against wrong. And that is going on all over our countries. So when you say somebody's taking a knee, that's cute. But when you stand up on principle and you say something and you do something, that's different.
So at the beginning of our talk here this evening, you were talking a lot about folks who had come in from outside or kind of outside agitators. Danny Westnate, I mentioned this to the mayor as well, from the Seattle Times, looked at the arrest records. And as much as there were these national stories, there were local stories as well, that folks were coming into Seattle, coming into Portland, coming into other places. A look at the arrest records showed that many of them, of the folks who disrupted your own peaceful protests, are homegrown. They're from Seattle, or they gave Seattle addresses. What about that?
Yeah, what about that is that you're the only one that's shocked to know that you got neo-Nazis in the city. You're the only one shocked to know that you got
actually not shocked
that they got
because
the Proud Boys in the city. You're the only one shocked that got white supremacists in the cities. You think they don't live here?
But we also have professional protesters here as well.
Okay. But I'm saying we're talking about individuals that have proven that they will kill. Remember Charlotte?
Of course.
They have proven that they will kill. So we're talking about something different. We're talking about a different type of mind. We're not talking about anything cute. We're talking about something that somebody will take a person's life. That's something different.
That is indeed.
Yeah.
You know, I could talk to you all evening, but I am out of time here.
Okay.
And I want to thank you so much for coming. Big thanks to Andre Taylor of the group Not This Time for coming to our show tonight. I want also like to thank Paul Guppy of the Washington Policy Center, who was supposed to be on the show tonight but bowed out so we could give more time to this very important story. Civic Cocktail will take a July and August break and return in early September. Have a great summer, everyone, and thank you so much for watching.